learners, and welcome to the 49th lecture in this NPTEL course on 20th century poetry. We have been discussing the work of Elizabeth Bishop, and today we will conclude our discussion of this poet. In the previous lecture, I began reading the poem titled Questions of Travel. I stopped at a stanza in which the speaker of the poem was giving us two perspectives. And the speaker, she had just finished giving us some arguments for why, despite the skepticism which she herself had expressed earlier, it was still worthwhile to travel. So the poem at this point has been staging a debate. The debate is between two perspectives. The first perspective critiques or questions the worth of traveling. This argument proceeds something like this. We make a plan to travel based on what we desire to see. What we desire to see is a desire that's created by businessmen, people who want to sell certain things like flights or hotels. But when we travel, we don't realize that by the time we reach the object which we desire to see, the object in whose presence we wish to take our pictures or through which we plan to enrich ourselves, those objects may have changed. So ultimately, our desire to travel is a somewhat self-centered and somewhat greedy kind of a desire, because we assume that time passes for us, but time stands still for the objects which we commodify. This is one view. And because of this view, the speaker of the poem asks, what is the point of traveling? Why not just stay where we are, do our traveling through our imagination? This is the first argument. Now, in response to this argument, the speaker herself offers some countering thoughts. The speaker suggests that no, that's not quite possible. It is not possible to replicate all of the uniqueness, all of the accidental magic, all of the unplanned beauties that we encounter while traveling. Because that's what makes travel truly remarkable. Not the picture-perfect postcards, not the selfies that we can put on social media, although Bishop was writing much before social media was a reality. But still, we can extrapolate, we can project. The point, according to Bishop, or the reason why people travel, even though they may not articulate it with this accuracy and this precision, is not to simply see more sunsets, but rather to have those accidental encounters in which, without planning it, they encounter something so unremarkable, something that would have been so ordinary, but which through a particular combination of circumstances, time, place, memory, becomes quite extraordinary. And the poet gives some examples, like hearing the song, hearing the music of a fat brown bird who sings above the broken gasoline pump in a bamboo church of Jesuit Baroque. These things cannot be imagined by a poet sitting in her office, right? So there is a very unique argument for travel, which is that traveling creates the conditions for such accidental encounters with extraordinary beauty. Further, the poet continues, and I will read, yes, a pity not to have pondered, blurredly and inconclusively, on what connection can exist for centuries between the crudest wooden footwear and, careful and finicky, the whittled fantasies of wooden footwear, and, careful and finicky, the whittled fantasies of wooden cages. Never to have studied history in the weak calligraphy of songbirds' cages. Never to have had to listen to rain so much like politicians' speeches. 2 hours of unrelenting oratory and then a sudden golden silence in which the traveler takes a notebook, writes. Is it lack of imagination that makes us come to imagine places, not just stay at home? Or could Pascal have been not entirely right about just sitting quietly in one's room? Continent, city, country, society, the choice is never wide and never free. And here or there, no, should we have stayed at home, wherever that may be? This is how the poem concludes. So, what we have seen here is that the poet is staging not simply a series of questions, but also a series of actions. Having staged these, having asked these questions, the poet asks us to visualize a traveler, a person who is doing this kind of traveling. This traveler takes a notebook and reflects. And then the question that this traveler writes in his notebook is really the heart of the poem. It gives the poem its power. And what is that question? Is it a lack of imagination that makes us come to imagined places, not just stay at home? This is the first question, and let's reflect on this. It's a paradoxical question. It is trying to understand something that is truly difficult, if not impossible. What is the question? Is it a lack of imagination that makes us come to imagined places? The word imagination is used twice, and it means different things in each of these instances. So, in the first instance, the person who travels has imagined something, right? The person who travels does so, undertakes this effort at the expense of considerable time, effort, and money because they would like to pursue something. They would like to pursue and possess something. What is it that they would like to possess? They would like to possess the memory, but also they would like to possess the experience. What kind of an experience? The experience of seeing a famous place, a historical monument, something that is considered to be valuable by people around them. One can take the example of historical monuments, or one can take the example of natural beauty. Both of these are attractive. So people often describe wanting to travel to see, for instance, the pyramids of Egypt, or people would like to see the natural beauty of, say, Iceland or New Zealand. Right? These are quite scenic places. People have heard about these things. People might have seen pictures of these things. And from these external stimuli, people form images. People imagine that it would be good or it would be pleasurable to visit these places. This is an imagination. This is one way in which the poet is using the word imagination in this sentence, that we like to go or we like to make the effort to visit imagined places. But there is a second sense in which the poet is using the word imagination. This is not simply visualizing a place, but something deeper, something that requires more effort, something that requires a more strenuous act of visualization. What does this other kind of imagination involve? The poet suggests that a traveler who makes a plan to become a tourist, to visit an imagined place, actually has a lack of imagination. This is a very strange thing. It's a clue for us to help us imagine what kind of a thinking is it that the speaker is expecting people to have. Choosing a place to visit requires some visualization. But this visualization is a particularly deficient or impoverished kind of imagination. This is the poet's point, or rather, it is a speculation because the poet has this thought and is trying to get confirmation, trying to know if this thought is actually accurate, is based on some real evidence, can be believed in, or is it merely an opinion that she, the poet, has. So, choosing a place to travel to reflects not imagination, but the deficiency of imagination. This is the point. Now, to try and understand, let's try and imagine how can it be a deficiency of the imagination to decide on a place to visit. So let's say I make a plan to travel to, let's say I win a lottery and I receive some money and I would like to spend that money on traveling to a famous, exotic, beautiful place. And I scan my imagination, my brain, and my memory for all the pictures of beautiful places that I might have seen, and I decide on a place. Let's say I would like to go to Kashmir in India, or let's say I would like to go to the pyramids of Egypt. Now, simply deciding on a place by looking at images, right? Imagined places. Imagined, the act of creating an image. An image is a reflection of reality, right? So if I decide on a place simply by looking at images, then that is actually a lack of imagination. Are there other means that I could have used to decide on what place I would like to visit? What if, instead of looking at images of places, I started reading a little bit about the history or the origin or the culture of places? Let's say instead of looking at images of Kashmir or Egypt, I decided to read about the history and the culture of Kashmir or Egypt. How would my thinking about these places change? I'm not sure, but it is the poet's claim that if I were to go about choosing my travel destination, not simply by evaluating the quality of the images of these places, but rather by reading about the history and the culture of these places, my justification for choosing a place that I would like to travel to would be different. Not only would it be different, it would be better. This is what the poet means by using the word imagination in a more intellectual, more spiritually and ethically more demanding way. For the poet, true imagination is more than visualizing an image. True imagination or powerful imagination of a place involves some historical aspect. It involves some knowledge of what it truly means for us to travel to a certain place. This kind of imagination also involves some thinking about what we would be doing by traveling to a certain place. Travel is not simply the burning of fossil fuels, the flying of planes, or the moving of cars, or the physical movement of people from one place to another. That is a very important part of travel, sure. In fact, without the physical movement of people, travel is impossible. But truly, travel gains its spiritual and human value for Elizabeth Bishop, not through the physical movement of people, but through an intellectual or emotional and spiritual realization, reflection, and thinking of what we are doing as human beings when we move from one place to another. So, if we accept that this is what truly makes travel a memorable experience, then for Elizabeth Bishop and for the speaker of these lines, most people who decide on where to go to based on the images of places that they have, these people are actually thinking in very impoverished ways. Their imagination is quite poor, and this is not a very good imagination. So, this is the first tentative suspicion that the speaker of these lines has in the line, is it lack of imagination? And second, in order to support this claim, in order to give some weight to this suspicion, the speaker adds, was Pascal right about just sitting quietly in one's room? So again, this is the quote which I had shared earlier in the previous lecture. The quote from Pascal is that the sole cause of man's unhappiness is that he does not know how to stay quietly in his room. So given this intellectual knowledge, or given this intellectual definition of what makes travel so memorable and meaningful, should we all believe Pascal and just give up on travel? Should we all become much more conservative? Should we all conserve resources and should we give up on travel entirely? This is the question that this poet and speaker has, and she is quite suspicious. She is not leaning either way. This is an open question. It is not a rhetorical question. It is not nudging or encouraging the reader to take either of two positions. There are two positions, and both appear equally persuasive to the poet. Further, the poet continues, continent, city, country, society. The choice is never wide and never free. And here or there, no, should we have stayed at home, wherever that may be? So again, the poet repeats this question, should we have stayed at home? It seems that the poet is inclined to believe it. The poet would like to know that in fact it is better to not travel. In fact, the best form of travel is one that doesn't involve the expense of either money or fossil fuels. In fact, the best form of travel may be to sit at one's desk quietly and read a book, or in today's digital visual culture, maybe to watch a YouTube video or a movie or a documentary about a place. The poet is inclined to agree that these forms of travel, reading a book, watching a documentary about a place, are actually better in some ways than physically traveling to a place. And one additional reason that the poet provides in this stanza is that however wide we may travel, however far we may go, we may cross continents, we may cross cities, we may go to a different city, we may go to a different country or a different society. However far we may go, there is a sense in which we can never go far enough. What does the poet mean by this? The poet means that we will always be limited by our background, by our knowledge, by our cultural education, by the ways in which our identity is shaped, by our nation, by our gender, by our language, by our religion, and so on. So travel can do something, travel can show us that there are different ways of being human, but ultimately we will remain quite resistant to these other ways of being human. So I will stop my discussion of this poem here and move on to some other very, very masterful as well as intimate poems in the same collection, which is Geography 3. I will now read the poem One Art. This is probably the poem for which Elizabeth Bishop is most well known. This is the poem by Bishop which is taught in most undergraduate and postgraduate courses all over the world. And it's a very powerful poem, so there's no mystery as to why this would be selected. But it's important to read this poem because it is written at a time when Bishop seems to be more concerned with questions of physical movement, or this is written at a time in her career when she seems more inclined to reflect on the meanings of travel. And this poem is not really about travel, but rather it's about becoming a person. It's about growing old. And it's about accepting tragedy. It's about accepting setbacks. It's about accepting that being human or functioning in the world is a matter of reconciling oneself to the fact that one doesn't get one's way. Or rather, it is accepting that we are not in control. So, this poem is about accepting the lack of control which makes us human. And further, it is about reinterpreting the lack of control not as a tragedy, but as a comedy. And comedy not in the sense of being humorous or funny, but comedy as the condition that makes us human. So, what makes us human, according to the poet of One Art? What makes us human is the ability to deal with loss. So, with that preface, let me read the poem. One Art. The art of losing isn't hard to master. So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost that their loss is no disaster. So, a beautiful musical opening stanza, master rhymes with disaster, and this same form will be repeated throughout the poem. It's a very, very powerful, very, very tight poetic construction. But I'll reflect on the theme of the poem and talk about form on another occasion. So, One Art. The poet seems to suggest that if we are looking for life skills, the kind of skills that make us better equipped to function as human beings, then we must have the skill of losing. And the poet calls it the art of losing. And the art of losing, it seems, would be a difficult art because the art of losing is sometimes, or it might appear to be difficult because it's not something that's fun. And arts are supposed to give some sort of pleasure or satisfaction, whether it is the art of creating pictures, making images, whether it is the art of writing, whether it is the art of making music. All of these things, after an initial period of training or learning, they all are sustained because they provide the practitioner of these arts with some sort of pleasure. Whether the pleasure is connected to a person's livelihood or whether the pleasure is merely a personal hobby, each of these arts give pleasure. But the art of losing, that sounds like a strange kind of pleasure, if anything, that can be had from it. Why would losing be something that a person tries to learn or tries to get better at? So the first task that the speaker of these lines has is to try and convince readers that losing is an art that is valuable and it can be something that readers can make an effort to get better at. So the first reason that the poet gives is that readers should try to learn this art because it's actually not that difficult. And here the speaker uses the word losing to refer to small things, material objects, literal things that we can tend to misplace, like keys or like a pen or something not very valuable, something that we tend to carry with us, and something which we tend to place somewhere and forget where we've placed it and move on or walk away and then lose it. That is to say, we forget where we place these things and can no longer find them. So here loss is not really a tragedy. It's something that we accept very easily because we know that because of the nature of our lives, because we are human, because we move, because we carry things, and we are multitasking. We are involved in multiple intellectual and cognitive tasks. We may be talking to someone at the time we unlock the door to our house, and if we're on the phone, then we'll place the key to our house somewhere and forget about it because we are on the phone. So these things are both very easy to accept, and also the reason why these losses are easy to accept is because we know that they are temporary. If we misplace our keys, we can maybe look for them, and maybe after half an hour, we'll find them. So the first reason for why the art of losing is worth learning is that A, it comes easily to us. We all lose things from time to time. And second, it's not our fault. So we can accept this art without feeling that we have failed, or that we have somehow become incompetent, or that we are disabled, or that we are suffering from some kind of dementia or Alzheimer's, or some kind of memory loss. So again, this is also a comment on some forms of disability, because Alzheimer's is an illness in which losing or forgetting is not something that comes back, but becomes more and more acute and chronic. So losing small things is easy, and we can accept that. So if we make that into an art, then we can become better as human beings. This is what the first stanza is saying. Further, lose something every day. So the poet is now asking us. First, the poet said, you can do this. It might appear or sound strange, but it's actually very easy, because we all lose things, and some things are, very inconsequential and less expensive. So they are designed to be lost and found. So there is some amount of redundancy built into them. That's the first stanza. Now, the poet is asking us deliberately, directly, to lose things, to start losing things, to practice the art of losing. How can we practice? The poet says, lose something every day. Accept the fluster of lost door keys, the hour badly spent. The art of losing isn't hard to master. So the poet is slowly increasing the stakes by giving us examples of things that increasingly grow in significance. The first example is lost door keys. Now, losing keys is not a very serious loss, because we can call a mechanic or a key maker and have a new lock, or have a replica of the key, or have the door broken in and have the lock replaced. So these things are very easily done, or if not very easily, then they are managed without much inconvenience. The second example is of something that's a little harder to replace. In fact, is impossible to replace. And what is that? The hour badly spent. Now, 1 hour, depending on a person's age, right, may or may not be that valuable a thing to lose. I think generally speaking, the younger one is, the cheaper time is, and the older one gets, more valuable time gets. So when the speaker says this, the hours spent badly, the speaker is making an arbitrary assumption. No matter how old a person is, 1 hour is not such a big, such a long time to lose if one ends up spending it badly. We must not always try to be productive. We must not always try to squeeze some utility or value out of every second of our lives. We must not do that. In fact, we must relax sometimes. And sometimes when we relax, the definition of relaxation is to do nothing, or to do things with our time that do not translate into value. I will quickly read through the remainder of this poem and conclude our discussion of Elizabeth Bishop. The third stanza goes thus: Then practice losing farther, losing faster, places and names, and where it was you meant to travel. None of these will bring disaster. I lost my mother's watch, and look, my last or next to last of 3 loved houses went. The art of losing isn't hard to master. I lost 2 cities, lovely ones, and vaster, some realms I owned, 2 rivers, a continent. I missed them, but it wasn't a disaster. Even losing you, the joking voice, a gesture I love, I shan't have lied. It's evident the art of losing is not too hard to master, though it may look like disaster. So, the poet keeps shifting from examples that increase and decrease in significance. Some of these things are extremely valuable, like her mother's watch. Some of these things are extremely large and extremely intangible, like living in a place, the memory of living in a place. This is what the poet means when she says, I lost 2 cities. What does it mean to lose a city? How can a person lose a city? It's not like they owned it. Rather, they are speaking of the time that they spent in a city. So if you move to a different place, you lose the experience of living in a certain place. So that is a loss. So memory, this is memory. Growing old involves losses. This is what the poem is really saying, that even if you don't have tragedies, a perfectly normal life is still filled with losses. And it is better to practice losing at an early stage, because it will be good for us, because we will not feel the pain of tragedies when they come for us, as they will come for everyone. So some people have tragedies early in their lives, like Bishop had, losing both her parents at the age of 5. Some people don't have such tragedies until very late in their lives, and this is true for most people. Most people do not lose their parents until they themselves have children, or they themselves are in their middle age. But then that doesn't mean that we have escaped tragedy. No, in fact, losing one's parents is the one tragedy that no one ever escapes. And so the lesson that this poem gives its readers is that if we can practice losing by detaching ourselves to things that we are attached to in small ways, if we can anticipate the big losses before they come, then we might get better at living this life. We might make our life much more peaceful, much more sustainable. So with this, we have reached an end of our discussion of Elizabeth Bishop, and I hope that I have clarified how the poet reflects on physical movement, that is traveling from one place to another, but is actually writing about reconciling oneself to deep and irrecoverable losses. This makes her among the most powerful poets in the 20th century, and we are all grateful that we have the chance to read, appreciate, and enjoy the poems by Elizabeth Bishop. Thank you.